My daughter called me last Tuesday, not because she needed anything, not because of a birthday or a holiday or some obligation on a calendar somewhere. She just called, and we talked for almost an hour about nothing important, about the weather where she lives, and a book she'd been reading, and a memory she had of a vacation we took when she was maybe 9 years old, a vacation I had almost forgotten completely. And when we hung up, I sat in this chair right here by the window and I cried, not because I was sad, because I remembered a time, a long stretch of time, years of it, when that phone never rang, when I used to sit in this same chair and wait, and the waiting was the loneliest thing I have ever felt in my life. My name is Harold Mercer. I am 91 years old. I live in a small house in western Pennsylvania, in a town most people have never heard of, and I have outlived my wife, two of my closest friends, and one version of myself that I am not entirely proud of. I don't tell you that to earn your sympathy. I tell you that so you understand I have had enough time on this earth to be wrong about something for decades before I finally understood it. And there's a particular kind of pain that comes with that, when the understanding arrives too late to undo what was done. I had 3 children. I still have 3 children. They are alive, all of them, which I am grateful for every single morning. Margaret is 63 now. Thomas is 60. And the youngest, Diane, she just turned 57 last month. 57. I remember when she was born. I remember standing in that hospital hallway, and a nurse handed her to me, this small, quiet thing, and I held her with both hands like she might break. Like she was the most fragile object I had ever been trusted with. And then life happened, the way it does, and somehow, somewhere, in the middle of all that life, I lost the thread. For a long time, I believed my children drifted away because they were busy, because that's what children do. They grow up, they build their own lives, they get absorbed into their own families and their own problems and their own noise. I told myself it was natural. I told myself it was fine. But the truth, the real truth I couldn't look at directly for a long time was that I had done something. Not one dramatic thing, not one terrible moment I could point to, but something quieter than that. Something that accumulated over years the way dust does in a room you stop using. I had made them feel like they were never quite enough. Not with cruelty. I want to be clear about that. I was never a cruel man. But I had expectations, quiet, unspoken expectations, and when my children didn't meet them, I let them feel it. In the way I went quiet at dinner when Thomas told me he was leaving his law program. In the way I looked at Diane's first apartment, that small, cluttered apartment she was so proud of, and said almost nothing. I thought I was being honest. I thought silence was better than saying the wrong thing. What I didn't understand, what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, was that my silence was saying something too. It was saying, "This is not what I hoped for you." And they heard it. Every time. There was a Sunday. I don't remember the exact year, somewhere in my late 60s maybe. My wife Eleanor was still alive. We had the whole family over for Easter, and the house was full in the way I always thought I wanted it to be. Everyone was there. All 3 kids, the grandchildren running in and out of the back door, Eleanor in the kitchen, the smell of food everywhere. And at some point, I was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, just watching, and I noticed something. My children, my 3 grown children, were laughing with each other, telling stories, pulling the grandchildren onto their laps, and they weren't looking toward me. Not once. It wasn't hostile. That's what confused me at first. It wasn't anger. It was just they had arranged themselves in a circle that didn't include me. Naturally, unconsciously, the way people do when they feel comfortable with each other and slightly careful around someone else. I was the someone else, in my own house, at my own table. I went outside after that. I stood on the back porch for a long time, pretending I needed some air, and I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was nothing, but I knew. Somewhere underneath all that telling myself, I knew. Eleanor saw it before I did. She always saw things before I did. That was simply the kind of woman she was. Sharp and quiet about it. She didn't announce what she noticed. She just waited until the right moment and then said it gently, the way you set something fragile down on a surface. One evening, a few weeks after that Easter, we were sitting together after dinner. The television was on, but neither of us was really watching it, and she said, out of almost nowhere, "Harold, do you ever ask them about themselves? Not advice, not what you think, just ask them." I told her I didn't know what she meant. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly and looked back at the television. That was all. That was the entire conversation, and I thought about it for about 2 days, and then I put it somewhere I didn't have to look at it, because looking at it meant admitting that she was right, and admitting she was right meant looking at a long pattern of behavior I wasn't ready to examine. That's what pride does. It doesn't protect you from pain, it just delays it and adds interest. The calls became less frequent through my 70s, not all at once. It was gradual, the way a tide goes out. You don't notice it moment by moment. You just look up one day, and the water is much further away than you remembered, and the beach between you and it is wider than you thought it could get. Birthdays, they called. Holidays, sometimes. But the in-between calls the ones that don't have a reason. The ones that are just wanting to talk, those had mostly stopped. And I noticed. Of course I noticed. And what did I do? I called them. I asked when they were coming to visit. I mentioned, more than once, that I wasn't getting any younger. I said things like it would be nice to see you, in a tone that carried something heavier than the words themselves, something that sounded a little like accusation dressed up as longing. I thought I was being honest about my feelings. What I was actually doing was making them feel guilty. And guilt. I learned this too late. Guilt does not make people move toward you. It makes them go still. It makes them careful. It makes every phone call feel like something they have to brace for. I was wondering why the distance kept growing, while I was the one, quietly, every time, making it a little harder to close. Eleanor died 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast 4 months between the diagnosis and the end. Fast enough that I didn't have time to prepare, though I'm not sure you can prepare for something like that regardless of how much time you're given. She died in October. The leaves were turning. I remember that very specifically. For some reason, the color of the trees outside her hospital window on her last afternoon. The children came. All three of them, immediately, without hesitation. They were wonderful during those 4 months, present and gentle and more patient with each other and with me than they had perhaps ever been. Grief does that sometimes. It cuts through the accumulated distance and reminds people of what's underneath it. But after the funeral, after the relatives went home, after the casseroles people bring stopped arriving after all of that, the quiet came back. And this time it was a different kind of quiet. Deeper, because Eleanor had been the warmth in this house, and without her, I was only beginning to understand how much of the connection I'd thought was mine had actually been hers. She had been the one who remembered everyone's birthdays with genuine enthusiasm. She had been the one who asked the right questions and actually listened to the answers. She had been the one who made the children feel seen. Without her, I was just a man sitting in a house, getting older, wondering why no one called. I'm going to tell you about one specific afternoon, because it's the one I come back to most often, the one that changed something in how I understood my own life. It was about 3 years after Eleanor passed. Diane came to visit just her, without her husband, without the kids. She drove up on a Saturday morning, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I made coffee, and we talked. And at some point, she said something to me. She said it carefully, gently, the way her mother used to say things. She said, "Dad, I don't always know how to talk to you. I never have. I'm never sure what you want from me when we're together." I started to respond. I started to explain, to defend, and she shook her head just slightly, not unkindly. And she said, "I'm not saying it to upset you. I wanted to say it out loud, just once." We sat with that for a while. The coffee got cold, and then I asked her, and this was new for me, asking this sincerely, rather than rhetorically. I asked her what she wished I had done differently, not so I could argue, not so I could explain my side. I asked because, for the first time in maybe my entire life, I actually wanted to know the answer more than I wanted to protect myself from it. She talked for a long time. I didn't say much. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. And when she was done, the kitchen was different somehow. Not fixed, not resolved, but different. She hugged me before she left. A real hug, not a polite one. And she said she'd call me on Tuesday. She did call. That Tuesday, and many Tuesdays after, I've had a lot of time to sit with all of this. Time is one thing I've had in abundance, especially these last few years when the body starts asking you to slow down whether you want to or not. I sit in this chair by the window most mornings. I watch the light change on the yard. I think, and what I've come to understand, not as a lesson, not as something I could have read in a book, is that I spent a very long time wanting my children to come toward me without ever really making myself someone they wanted to come toward. I was their father. I provided. I was present in the physical sense, at dinners, at graduations, at the moments that were supposed to matter, but I was not available in the way they needed me to be. I was not soft in the places they needed softness. I was not curious about them in the genuine, undefended way that makes a person feel like they matter to you. I was waiting for them to show up for me, while they were quietly, over many years, concluding that showing up for me was something they had to survive, rather than something they wanted to do. That is a hard thing to sit with. I sat with it for a long time before I could even let myself think it clearly. What changed wasn't dramatic. I want to be honest about that because I think we sometimes want change to be dramatic, a single moment, a single conversation, a before and after you can point to. It wasn't like that. It was more like I started asking questions, real ones. When Diane called, I stopped waiting for the conversation to circle back to me. I asked her about her work, and when she answered, I asked a follow-up question. Not to be performing interest, but because I started to actually find her interesting, my daughter, who I had known for 50 years and somehow still didn't fully know. I asked Thomas about what he was reading. He is an avid reader, Thomas, always has been, and for years I'd viewed that as a kind of retreat from the real world. One afternoon he mentioned a book, and instead of nodding vaguely, I asked him to tell me about it. He talked for 20 minutes. I could hear something shift in his voice about 5 minutes, in some small surprise that I was still there, still listening, still asking. Little things, ordinary things, the stuff of actual relationship which I had somehow missed or bypassed for most of my adult life. Margaret, my oldest, she and I had the hardest road. We are similar in the ways that make people clash rather than connect. Both stubborn, both convinced we're right, both slow to say the first soft thing. We had years of real distance between us, not dramatic fallout. Just the slow withdrawal that happens when two people decide, without ever quite deciding it, that it's easier to stay on the surface than to risk going deeper. About 2 years ago she came to visit. She stayed for 3 days, and on the last evening we sat outside. It was warm enough to sit outside, just barely, and she said something I've thought about nearly every day since. She said, "I always wanted you to be proud of me, Dad. I still do. Is that embarrassing to admit at 63? 63 years old. My daughter, still carrying that, still waiting for it." I told her I was proud of her, and then, and this is the part I think mattered, I told her why. Specifically, not a general, vague statement of approval, but the actual reasons. The things I had noticed over the years and never said. The ways I had watched her handle her life with a grace I had never acknowledged out loud. She cried, "I'm not ashamed to say I did too." We sat outside until it was dark and cold, and neither of us wanted to be the one to go in first. I am 91 years old. I have a bad hip and a heart that the doctors watch carefully, and a mind that is, so far, still mostly my own, for which I am grateful beyond what I can adequately express. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't think about it in the desperate way I might have once. I've made a kind of peace with the shape of my life, not because everything was good, but because enough of it, at the end, became real. My phone rings now. Not every day, but often enough that I no longer sit in this chair, counting the silences. Margaret calls on Sundays. Thomas sends me articles he thinks I'd find interesting, and he's usually right about that. Diane, who called last Tuesday just because she wanted to talk, is driving up next month to spend a few days. I didn't earn this by doing anything extraordinary. I earned it, if earned is even the right word, by finally, very late, becoming genuinely interested in who they were. By putting down whatever it was I needed them to reflect back at me, and just looking at them as people, as three remarkable people I somehow had the privilege of watching grow up, even when I wasn't paying the right kind of attention. If you are sitting somewhere watching this, and you feel that silence, I described that particular hollow silence of a phone that doesn't ring. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just an old man in a chair in Pennsylvania, and I only know what I lived. But I'll say this quietly before I go. The waiting is real, the longing is real, and the distance, however it formed, is real too. But the people on the other side of that distance, they might be carrying something real as well. Something they've never had the right moment to say. Sometimes the moment has to be made quietly, without knowing how it will go. I'm glad I made mine, even as late as it was. I'm glad there was still time. If something in this stayed with you, something you've never quite said out loud, maybe leave it in the comments. You don't have to explain it. Just knowing someone else sat with the same quiet might be enough. I'll be in my chair by the window. I'm usually there. Thanks for listening, my story. If you like my story, drop your comment and share your stories also. I thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.